When World War II began, the world witnessed the rise of what seemed like an unstoppable force, Hitler's war machine. The German army moved with terrifying precision. In 1939, Poland fell in weeks. In 1940, France, a major European power, collapsed in just 43 days. Cities burned before the world even realized they were under attack. Blitzkrieg, lightning war, became not just a military tactic but a psychological weapon. Germany looked untouchable. Its tanks were faster. Its soldiers more disciplined. Its leaders more ruthless. Even Britain, once master of the seas, struggled to breathe under relentless air raids. Europe was on its knees, and America, across the ocean, watched a continent burn. But what few understood was that the United States was never unprepared. It was waiting. While Germany boasted of conquest, America studied the pattern behind the madness. Roosevelt and his generals saw what many missed: Germany's brilliance was unsustainable. It relied on shock, speed, and spectacle. The Reich had the world hypnotized, but no long-term vision. Hitler's greatest illusion was that he was winning through genius. In truth, he was winning through momentum, a storm destined to slow down. And when it did, America would strike. When the US entered the war after Pearl Harbor, Hitler laughed. He dismissed Americans as soft, a mongrel race of materialists, incapable of sacrifice. He believed comfort had killed their courage. But that arrogance became his downfall. Because America wasn't coming to fight with emotion, it was coming with strategy. Hitler built a war machine made of tanks, guns, and ideology. America built one made of minds, steel, and deception. Germany fought like a hammer. The US fought like a surgeon. While Hitler obsessed over dominance, America built systems of power. Factories, logistics, and intelligence, all moving in perfect coordination. It wasn't about one battle or one general. It was about synchronization, a new kind of warfare. Behind every bullet, every aircraft, every naval strike was a chain of thought. A structure. A plan. A calculation. The US understood a truth older than war itself. The side that can think longer, plan deeper, and supply faster will always win. And that's how the balance began to shift, not through explosions, but through efficiency. While Hitler fought emotionally, America fought economically. While he led through rage, they led through reason. And while his empire stretched too thin, America's power multiplied quietly, across factories, blueprints, and radio codes. In time, this difference, the thinking war versus the emotional war, would decide the fate of the modern world. Hitler's mistake was believing he was fighting men. He was actually fighting a machine of intellect, patient, relentless, and evolving. Every American factory became a weapon. Every engineer became a strategist. Every deception became a victory before a bullet was fired. The myth of German invincibility was about to collapse, not because America had more soldiers, but because it had more strategy. The war was no longer about who could destroy faster, it was about who could outthink longer. And in that kind of war, Germany never stood a chance. When America entered the war, it didn't yet have the world's greatest army. It didn't have the largest fleet. But it possessed something far deadlier: industrial intelligence. While Hitler poured resources into perfecting his weapons, building the most advanced tanks, the fastest aircraft, the most imposing artillery, America asked a different question. What wins a long war, perfection or production? The answer would redefine warfare forever. President Franklin D. Roosevelt made a bold promise in 1940. The United States would become the arsenal of democracy. He meant it literally. Factories that once built cars began building bombers. Typewriter manufacturers turned to producing rifles. Sewing machine companies made parachutes. Every gear of the civilian economy was converted into a weapon of survival. And the results were staggering. By 1944, American factories were producing 8 aircraft every hour, 1 tank every 20 minutes, and a new ship every day. Hitler's engineers created magnificent machines, like the Tiger tank, powerful but complicated, slow to build, and impossible to maintain in mass numbers. Meanwhile, America's Sherman tanks rolled off the assembly line by the tens of thousands. They weren't perfect, but they worked, and more importantly, they never stopped coming. For every German tank destroyed, America could replace 10. It wasn't just industrial might, it was strategic foresight. The US wasn't fighting for elegance. It was fighting for efficiency. Behind every weapon stood a logistical miracle, an empire of workers, engineers, and mathematicians calculating how to move steel, oil, and manpower across oceans. Trains ran on perfect schedules. Factories operated around the clock. Supply ships crossed the Atlantic in endless convoys, unstoppable arteries feeding the Allied warfront. And yet, there was something deeper than numbers. This was a war of systems. Germany fought the old way, glorifying the individual general, the heroic soldier, the mythical leader. America fought the modern way, uniting minds, industries, and machines into one collective brain. It was centralized intelligence disguised as chaos. A factory worker in Detroit could directly influence a battle in Normandy. A steel worker in Pittsburgh was unknowingly arming the resistance in France. Every citizen became part of the grand strategy. Hitler couldn't comprehend it. His empire was built on fear, fear of failure, fear of questioning orders. In America, innovation thrived on freedom. Mistakes were studied, not punished. That difference, between obedience and innovation, was lethal. When German tanks ran out of fuel, America sent millions of gallons of high-octane aviation fuel across the Atlantic. When the Luftwaffe lost pilots, America trained thousands more. When German generals fought over strategy, America's high command adapted and evolved. The war machine of democracy outpaced the war machine of dictatorship. By 1943, German officers began to realize the truth. They weren't losing to better soldiers. They were losing to a nation that understood organization as warfare. Factories had become fortresses. Blueprints had become battle plans. Production itself had become a form of combat. And behind it all was a calm, mathematical brilliance, the understanding that wars are not won by who fights hardest, but by who can last longest. As the smoke rose over Europe, Hitler's empire of brutality began to crumble under the sheer weight of America's precision. Because while Germany built weapons of terror, America built a system of victory. By 1944, the Allies had one mission: invade Europe. Destroy the Nazi regime from within. But there was one problem: Hitler knew it was coming. The only question was where. For years, German intelligence watched the British coastline. They studied the tides, weather, and terrain. Every inch of the English Channel was under surveillance. They expected the Allies to attack across the narrowest point, Pas-de-Calais. It was the most logical invasion site. And that's exactly what the Americans wanted Hitler to believe. This was not just an invasion of land, it was an invasion of the mind. The United States and Britain launched Operation Fortitude, the largest deception campaign in military history. The goal: convince Hitler that Normandy wasn't the target. What followed was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Entire armies were invented out of thin air. Inflatable tanks, fake aircraft, wooden ships, all staged across southeastern England to create the illusion of a massive force preparing to strike Calais. They even built fake radio chatter, with false commands and coded messages sent daily. To complete the illusion, the Allies turned double agents into instruments of deceit. The most famous, Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo, was a Spanish spy who had infiltrated the Nazi network. He fed the Germans a steady stream of carefully crafted lies, all confirming what Hitler already wanted to believe, that the invasion would come from Calais. The brilliance of this operation wasn't just in its complexity, it was in its psychology. Hitler was blinded by his own certainty. He couldn't imagine that the Allies would risk attacking the rough terrain of Normandy when Calais was so much closer. He believed his own illusion. And that belief would cost him everything. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, the Allies launched the largest amphibious invasion in history. Over 150,000 troops stormed the beaches of Normandy under fire. German commanders were confused, waiting for a second invasion at Calais that never came. Hitler refused to send reinforcements. He was so convinced that Normandy was a diversion, he left his elite panzer divisions idle for days. By the time the truth reached him, it was too late. The beachhead was secured. The Allies were in Europe. The war's outcome had been sealed, not through overwhelming firepower, but through deception, patience, and control of perception. Operation Fortitude wasn't just a trick. It was a chess move against an empire of arrogance. It proved that Hitler's greatest weakness wasn't his military, it was his mind. He had built his power on fear, illusion, and control of others' perception. But now, those same weapons were being turned against him. He was fighting ghosts, armies that didn't exist, tanks that weren't real, voices that came from the airwaves. In a single stroke, the Allies demonstrated something extraordinary. The greatest weapon in war is not the gun, it's belief. And America wielded that weapon with surgical precision. They didn't just outfight Hitler, they outthought him. They turned his intelligence networks into puppets, his spies into storytellers, and his faith in logic into a trap. Operation Fortitude wasn't only a military success, it was a psychological masterpiece. It taught the world that victory doesn't always come from force. Sometimes, it comes from controlling what the enemy thinks is real. Every empire in history has believed its power was built on weapons. But the Americans knew something different: the real weapon is information. While Hitler glorified tanks, parades, and speeches, America, alongside its British allies, invested in something far more dangerous: brains. They created a war machine not of iron and fuel, but of minds that could think faster than any general, decode faster than any messenger, and anticipate moves before they were made. This was the birth of modern intelligence warfare. Deep within secret facilities, like Bletchley Park in Britain and Arlington Hall in the US, thousands of mathematicians, linguists, and codebreakers worked around the clock to break the Nazi codes that drove the German war machine. At the center of it all stood the Enigma, Hitler's most prized communication device. It used mechanical rotors to encrypt messages into millions of possible combinations, believed to be unbreakable. But America and its allies saw a pattern, and patterns could be destroyed. Men and women, many barely out of college, were recruited into this invisible war. People like William Friedman, Alan Turing, and hundreds of unnamed cryptographers, all sworn to secrecy, fought a battle not with bullets, but with logic. Every intercepted German transmission became a puzzle. Every solved puzzle became a weapon. Then, the impossible happened. The Allies cracked Enigma. Suddenly, the German High Command was speaking into a mirror. Unaware that their every secret was being read in real time. Convoys at sea changed course minutes before U-boats could strike. Factories were bombed the day before they began production. German offensives were predicted, outflanked, and crushed, because America and its allies knew where, when, and how they would happen. It was the ultimate reversal. Hitler, who once thrived on surprise, was now the one being outmaneuvered. His confidence, his pride, and his genius all turned against him by an enemy he couldn't see. This was no coincidence. It was design. The Americans built their entire war effort around intelligence synchronization, connecting field reports, cryptographic analysis, aerial reconnaissance, and intercepted messages into one living system. Every front became part of a single strategic brain. The United States had essentially built a thinking network, decades before the digital age. Meanwhile, in Germany, chaos reigned behind the illusion of discipline. Hitler distrusted his own generals. Information was filtered through fear. Mistakes were hidden. Warnings ignored. Where America encouraged innovation, Germany punished failure. And that difference, freedom of thought versus fear of error, was the true gap in power. By 1943, the US could predict German submarine movements before they left port. They broke the Luftwaffe's encrypted radio systems, allowing Allied bombers to strike supply lines and oil depots with surgical precision. What once looked like luck was actually mathematical dominance. Hitler's empire wasn't collapsing because it was weak, it was collapsing because it was blind. Every command, every deployment, every coded message passed through invisible American hands. And Hitler never realized it. He believed the Allies were lucky. He never understood that he was already fighting a war he could not hide from. This was the quiet war, the one fought behind typewriters, telegraphs, and radio frequencies. No glory. No medals. Just pure intellect dismantling tyranny. And by the time the Germans suspected anything, it was too late. Their unbreakable codes had been broken. Their supply lines were visible. Their strategy, predictable. In the end, America didn't just outfight Germany. It built a superior nervous system, a network of knowledge that made every battlefield a chessboard. Hitler had an army of men. America had an army of minds. And in modern war, minds always win. Hitler's war machine was made of steel, but it ran on oil. Without it, the tanks, planes, and trucks that powered his empire were nothing but metal carcasses. And America knew this. The US didn't just fight Germany head-on, it attacked the arteries of the Reich. Not the soldiers. Not the cities. But the fuel lines that kept the Nazi monster alive. By 1943, Allied strategists had identified a simple truth. Destroy Germany's oil, and you destroy its war. The German army's greatest strength, its mobility, depended entirely on a fragile supply of fuel. Hitler had no vast oil fields of his own. He relied on synthetic fuel made from coal and on the Romanian oil fields at Ploiești, his empire's lifeline. So America targeted it with surgical precision. While the Soviet Union bled Germany on the Eastern Front, U.S. bombers waged a new kind of war, the industrial assassination of an empire. On August 1, 1943, hundreds of American B-24 bombers launched Operation Tidal Wave, flying low across enemy territory to strike Ploiești. The mission was brutal. Casualties were immense. But the damage was catastrophic. Production at the oil fields dropped by more than 40%. Hitler called it one of the worst days of the war. Yet the Americans weren't finished. They kept hitting fuel refineries, synthetic plants, and rail lines. By mid-1944, German fuel reserves were collapsing. Tanks that had once stormed through Europe now stood idle. Fighter planes sat grounded, unable to take off. Entire divisions were immobilized, waiting for supplies that would never come. It wasn't just bombs that destroyed Germany's might, it was logistics. The US mastered the art of timing. Every strike was calculated to create maximum ripple effects. When one refinery fell, the next shipment couldn't reach the front. When a bridge was destroyed, fuel convoys had to detour for days, burning the very thing they were transporting. This was mathematical warfare. The goal wasn't to annihilate. It was to strangle. Meanwhile, on the Allied side, oil flowed endlessly. American engineers built pipelines across France, known as Operation Pluto, pipeline under the ocean, supplying advancing troops with fuel directly from England. No pause. No shortage. No failure. Where Germany ran on desperation, America ran on organization. And the results were devastatingly clear. In late 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler launched one last counterattack. His tanks broke through Allied lines, briefly. But soon, they ran out of gas. Literally. Entire units were abandoned, their engines silent, their soldiers fleeing on foot. The German generals begged for fuel. Hitler raged in his bunker, blaming incompetence and betrayal. But the truth was simpler: America had choked his war machine. This was the quietest victory of the entire war. No headlines. No glory. Just precision. A masterclass in economic warfare. By targeting the fuel that powered Germany's aggression, America didn't just weaken its armies, it dismantled the very idea of Nazi supremacy. Because war isn't won by courage alone. It's won by calculation. And in that realm, the United States was unmatched. The oil war revealed something profound about strategy itself. To defeat a monster, you don't fight its claws, you cut off its blood. That's exactly what America did. And as the German war machine sputtered and stalled, its illusion of invincibility began to die. By 1943, America was fighting a different kind of war. One that couldn't be seen on any battlefield. It wasn't fought with guns or bombs, but with economics. A war of resources, industry, and currency, where every barrel of oil, every shipment of steel, and every ounce of gold determined the fate of nations. Hitler's empire was vast, but it was fragile. It looked powerful on the surface, yet underneath, it was hollow. Germany's economy was built for short, brutal wars, not long ones. It relied on plunder, occupation, and fear. The moment the war dragged on, that system began to crack. And America was waiting for exactly that moment. While the Nazis waged war through domination, the United States built a global supply web. Factories, farms, and finance systems stretched across continents, feeding not only its own military, but also its allies. Through a brilliant strategic program called Lend-Lease, the US became the silent hand that armed half the world. The Soviet Union, Britain, Free France, China, all received American tanks, trucks, food, and fuel. The numbers were staggering. 400,000 trucks to the Soviets. 14,000 aircraft. Millions of tons of ammunition, grain, and fuel. Hitler's armies, meanwhile, faced a three-front war, financed by a single opponent who seemed to have infinite resources. It was economic encirclement. A slow constriction of Germany's capacity to fight. While the US spent and supplied, Hitler's economy bled itself dry. The difference was philosophical as much as logistical. The Nazi economy was centralized around ideology, production directed by obsession and fear. Factories were ordered to build miracle weapons like the V-2 rocket, which looked impressive but changed nothing. Hitler wanted symbols of power. America wanted results. The US treated the entire war as an equation. How much material could be produced, shipped, and deployed faster than it could be destroyed? How could each ton of steel yield maximum impact? Every number mattered. Every resource was weaponized. America understood something Hitler never did, that war isn't only about destruction. It's about sustainability. The nation that can keep its economy alive longer always wins. By 1944, German production was collapsing under Allied bombing campaigns. Rail networks shattered. Factories burned. Yet in America, production was accelerating. While Germany rationed bread, the United States was manufacturing B-29 bombers faster than Germany could repair its tanks. Money became a weapon. The US dollar, backed by vast resources and gold reserves, became the currency of victory. The more America spent, the weaker Germany became. Because every weapon sent abroad extended the war, and every day the war continued, Hitler's economy withered further. It was a trap he couldn't escape. He had started a war thinking he could conquer Europe before the world reacted. But he had unknowingly stepped into the world's first industrial ambush. A war not of speed, but of endurance. And endurance was America's domain. By 1945, the Nazi economy was dead, long before its cities were. Factories had no power. Railroads carried no fuel. Civilians starved while soldiers scavenged for supplies. The once mighty Reich had become a starving beast surrounded by abundance it could never reach. That's what true strategy looks like, not instant victory, but inevitable victory. A war designed to suffocate rather than strike. Hitler wanted to fight history with ideology. America fought ideology with economics. And in that battle, there was never any contest. Because brute force can win battles, but money wins wars. By 1944, the war had become a test of evolution. Who could adapt faster, innovate quicker, and weaponize knowledge more effectively? For all of Germany's technological boasting, the V-2 rockets, the jet fighters, the heavy tanks, it was America that mastered the true art of modern warfare, turning science into power. The Nazis believed in invention as spectacle. Hitler demanded miracle weapons, colossal machines that would restore faith in his empire. But these projects drained resources, delayed production, and often failed to deliver results. They were weapons for propaganda, not practicality. America, on the other hand, built quietly. It didn't chase miracles, it created systems. Every invention was designed to fit into a larger web of strategy, logistics, and data. The United States fused science with organization, and in doing so, rewrote the laws of warfare. Behind closed doors, the Office of Scientific Research and Development, OSRD, became the most powerful scientific institution in history. Thousands of physicists, engineers, chemists, and mathematicians worked day and night under one command: find the next advantage before the enemy does. The results changed everything. Radar, a technology that once seemed like science fiction, became the Allies' invisible shield. German bombers that once dominated the skies were now detected miles before they could strike. For the first time in history, battles were being decided by information in real time. Then came the proximity fuse. One of the most underrated inventions of the war. It allowed artillery shells to explode near a target rather than on impact, increasing destruction exponentially. German aircraft were suddenly shredded midair before they even reached their targets. Hitler's Luftwaffe never recovered. And behind the front lines, American scientists were developing precision bombs, sonar systems, and advanced communication networks. Every new idea was tested, scaled, and integrated into the war machine with mechanical precision. Germany, by contrast, was drowning in chaos. Hitler's interference crippled his own scientists. Projects were cancelled on whims. Resources diverted to vanity projects like the massive super tanks that could barely move. He demanded brilliance but killed innovation. In a dictatorship, genius suffocates under fear. America thrived on the opposite. Freedom of thought turned into innovation. Competition between research labs drove progress faster than any command from above. And it wasn't just military hardware, it was the entire infrastructure of science. The US perfected mass production of complex technology. It didn't build the best, it built the most effective. Simple. Reliable. Reproducible. By 1944, German commanders started to notice something unsettling. Their soldiers were outgunned not by superior men, but by superior systems. American artillery was faster. American radar saw farther. American planes flew longer. And for every new German invention, America already had a countermeasure in production. Even the atomic bomb, the deadliest creation in human history, began as part of this network. It wasn't just a scientific achievement, it was a proof of concept that in a war of intelligence, democracy could outthink dictatorship. Germany's mistake was believing that fear could fuel progress. America's success proved that collaboration could create dominance. By the time Hitler's engineers rolled out their experimental jets and rockets, it was too late. They were symbols of desperation, not power. The American technological web was already too vast, too efficient, and too deeply entrenched. In the end, Germany built marvels. America built momentum. And momentum, driven by science, organization, and innovation, is what crushes empires. Because power isn't about who invents the biggest weapon. It's about who turns knowledge into victory first. And in that, America had already won. By 1944, Hitler's war machine was no longer running on fuel or discipline, it was running on delusion. His empire, once feared for its precision, had become a labyrinth of paranoia and lies. Every general feared him. Every mistake was hidden. Every defeat rebranded as a strategic withdrawal. And while the Reich suffocated in its own deception, America's command structure evolved. The difference between the two systems was more than political, it was psychological. Germany's entire military hierarchy depended on one man's approval. Every order, every plan, every decision had to pass through Hitler's increasingly unstable mind. He micromanaged troop movements, obsessed over minor battles, and ignored critical reports. As his world shrank to the confines of his bunker, his perception of reality warped beyond repair. He dismissed intelligence he didn't like. He replaced truth with fantasy. And in that moment, the moment Hitler stopped listening, the German war machine stopped thinking. Meanwhile, across the ocean, America was doing the opposite. Its commanders were trained to adapt, to question, to innovate. General Dwight D. Eisenhower led not as a dictator but as an orchestrator. He delegated authority to field commanders, trusting their judgment. If one plan failed, another was born within hours. If a mistake was made, it wasn't buried, it was studied. That simple difference, punishment versus analysis, gave America a permanent edge. In Germany, failure was treason. In America, failure was data. By 1944, Hitler was isolated. His generals knew the war was lost, but few dared to tell him. Reports from the front were censored, statistics falsified. He screamed at commanders to hold positions that no longer existed. Entire divisions were ordered to fight to the last man, wasting lives for nothing but pride. This wasn't strategy anymore. It was madness dressed as command. On the other side, America's operations became a model of cohesion. Logistics flowed seamlessly. Intelligence from codebreakers and spies was relayed directly to generals. Airstrikes, troop movements, and naval operations worked as one integrated organism, a living system that reacted faster than the enemy could think. That's how you win a war of minds, by creating a structure that learns, adapts, and evolves faster than chaos. Even the morale was different. German soldiers were fighting for fear. American soldiers were fighting for coordination, for purpose. They knew someone above them had a plan that worked. When the Allies landed in Normandy and pushed inland, German defenses began to crumble not because of lack of courage, but because of confusion. Orders contradicted each other. Supplies failed to arrive. Air cover was gone. Communications collapsed. And in every weakness, the Americans saw opportunity. They adapted on the move, turning setbacks into strategies. Every inch they gained was the product of not just strength, but discipline of mind. As Hitler's paranoia deepened, his isolation became total. He distrusted his generals, fired his best officers, and surrounded himself with sycophants. He became a prisoner of his own narrative, a man who could no longer tell truth from illusion. That was the final victory of intelligence over tyranny. The Nazi war machine, once the model of order, had devolved into disarray. The U.S. war system, built on trust, communication, and adaptation, had become a machine of clarity. And in the modern world, clarity is deadlier than chaos. Hitler's fall wasn't caused by bombs or bullets. It began the moment he stopped listening, stopped learning, and started believing in his own myth. While his empire rotted from within, America's power expanded through cooperation, innovation, and calculation. The war had revealed the ultimate truth of power. Control is not strength. Adaptation is. And as Hitler's confidence collapsed into paranoia, America's calm coordination became unstoppable. By 1945, Hitler's empire wasn't a war machine anymore, it was a dying organism. What once roared across Europe in lightning-fast blitzkrieg now crawled through rubble and silence. Factories stood in ruins. Trains no longer moved. Tanks rusted where they'd stopped for lack of fuel. The so-called thousand-year Reich had lasted barely 12. But the destruction itself wasn't what killed Germany. It was the trap, the slow, systematic constriction that America had engineered. Every move had been planned to choke the Nazi war engine at its source. First the supply lines. Then the fuel. Then the factories. Then the mind. When the Allies crossed into Germany, they weren't fighting the same enemy that had conquered Europe 5 years earlier. They were fighting ghosts, soldiers without supplies, commanders without orders, leaders without belief. The machine had turned against itself. The Americans advanced not with haste but with precision. Every step was backed by air dominance, logistical superiority, and intelligence that predicted enemy positions before battles even began. Every strike, every maneuver, every bomb was placed exactly where it would cause maximum disruption. Germany's vaunted mechanized divisions, once symbols of unstoppable power, now relied on horses to move artillery. The Luftwaffe, once masters of the skies, had been reduced to fragments. American bombers flew over Berlin unchallenged, rewriting the balance of the heavens. What Hitler had built through terror, America dismantled through calculation. Inside the Reich Chancellery, the delusion continued. Hitler issued orders to imaginary divisions. He blamed the weather, the generals, even fate, anything but himself. His empire had become an echo chamber of denial. No one dared speak truth. No one dared face reality. Outside, that reality was devastatingly clear. The U.S. Army was moving through the Rhine. Patton's Third Army advanced like a living blade, cutting through what was left of German resistance. Each advance was fueled by a supply chain that stretched seamlessly from the ports of France to the front lines, proof of America's greatest strength, organization as warfare. Meanwhile, Germany's communication networks had collapsed. Radio signals were jammed. Cables cut. Entire units fought without knowing the war was already lost. They were shadows of a command structure that no longer existed. And still, America moved forward, methodically, relentlessly, unemotionally. This wasn't revenge. It was execution, the final act of a strategy designed years before the first tank ever rolled. The German war machine had been outthought, outmaneuvered, and ultimately outlasted. The nation that once dominated Europe now starved in silence, its cities reduced to ashes, its factories stripped of function. But what truly defeated Hitler wasn't firepower, it was structure. America had built a war system that could replace what it lost faster than the enemy could destroy it. It didn't need perfection. It needed endurance. And endurance always wins against rage. By April 1945, Berlin was surrounded. Hitler refused to leave. He still imagined a miracle, a counterattack, a secret weapon, divine intervention. None came. Only silence. In that silence, the truth of his defeat echoed louder than any explosion. The men who thought he could rule the world had been defeated by a nation that never sought glory, only efficiency. America's victory wasn't a story of luck or power. It was the story of design, of a civilization that understood that intelligence, discipline, and unity could dismantle any tyranny. As the German capital fell and Hitler vanished into his bunker's shadows, the world shifted. The age of brute force was over. The age of strategic supremacy had begun. And from the ashes of the Reich, a new empire quietly emerged, not built on fear, but on control of information, industry, and will. The war ended not with triumph, but with realization. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The world cheered, but beneath the celebration, the truth was colder, deeper, and more enduring. Hitler's empire had not been defeated by sheer violence, it had been outthought. The might of his armies, the pride of his engineers, the terror of his ideology, all dismantled by a nation that mastered the invisible battlefield, strategy. For the first time in human history, victory had not come from kings, heroes, or divine destiny. It had come from systems. From organization, mathematics, intelligence, and patience. America had proven something that would shape the next 100 years. that the mind, not the sword, rules the future. While Germany glorified control, America perfected coordination. Where Hitler's command was built on fear, America's was built on function. Every soldier, scientist, and engineer became part of a larger intelligence, a network that could learn, adapt, and act faster than any dictator. This was not luck. This was evolution. The transformation of warfare from instinct to intellect. When the bombs stopped falling and the cities lay silent, the true battlefield remained, the one inside human systems, economics, technology, communication, and perception. And America had mastered all of them. The victory revealed an eternal truth about power itself. Those who can control complexity without being consumed by it, they rule the world. Germany was consumed by its own machinery, overwhelmed by the chaos it created. America, meanwhile, learned how to turn chaos into order. Factories that once produced for war were transformed into the engines of a new global economy. Intelligence networks that decoded the Reich now formed the backbone of a new era, the Cold War, the digital age, the age of information dominance. The lesson of Hitler's defeat wasn't just military. It was philosophical. Power built on intimidation collapses under its own weight. Power built on structure, on unseen, quiet mastery, lasts for generations. The United States didn't just win a war, it changed the definition of war itself. It proved that force alone no longer decided fate, organization did. That wars are not only fought in trenches and skies, but in factories, laboratories, and ideas. Every blueprint, every algorithm, every production line became the new arsenal. And in that arsenal, America stood unrivaled. Hitler sought to conquer through fear. America conquered through efficiency. He built monuments of terror. America built networks of dominance. When Berlin burned, so did the last illusion that emotion and brutality could rule the modern world. The new world would belong to those who could think in systems, those who could turn intellect into power, knowledge into empire. And so, as the smoke settled over Europe, a quiet truth emerged. America had not simply defeated Germany, it had outgrown it. While one empire fell to its arrogance, another rose through calculation. This was not the victory of democracy over dictatorship, nor of good over evil, though it carried both meanings. It was the victory of reason over chaos. Of strategy over impulse. Of the mind over the myth. The machine Hitler built was terrifying. But the machine America built was smarter. And in the end, intelligence always devours aggression. That is how the modern world began, not with the roar of armies, but with the quiet hum of systems that could think, move, and act as one. Because history remembers one timeless truth. Power doesn't belong to the strongest. It belongs to the one who knows how to use strength the smartest. And in World War II, that one was America.